Welcome to the Sommelier Series. Welcome to Paarl. Welcome to Nederburg, the entrance to the estate behind me. Sweeping driveway up into the estate where awaits some fine wine and some glorious views. And on a day like this, it's pretty hard to compete with Nederburg as somewhere to come out. Time in the manor house, at the restaurant, trying some wine. It is glorious, but this is a part of the world generally that's pretty beautiful, and our location today is very much that. It's home of what is probably the best hotel cellar in the world. Ellerman House is a boutique hotel that's hosted everybody. Oprah Winfrey stayed there, the Kardashians have stayed there, the Clintons have stayed there, Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal stayed there recently when they played their tennis match in Cape Town. But Paul Harris's hotel is also home to an extraordinary cellar, big spiral inside of it, thousands of bottles of wine, very carefully curated and looked after by a terrific team. Manny, the Chilean export, and then Wayve Kolevsohn, who is our sommelier this week. She's had already a remarkable career, and she swapped life in the Maldives for life in Cape Town. But when life in Cape Town involves Ellerman House as your daily office, it's not too hard to understand why she made the call. This is one of my favourite cellars in South Africa, possibly in the world, and it's hard to find one that is more spectacular. The aesthetic of the cellar here at Ellerman House is brilliant, and the only match for it is the quality and sheer volume of wine that stays inside this particular cellar. Paul Harris has curated with his team an exceptional selection of mostly South African wine, and you could happily be locked in there for months on end. Believe me, I've tried, they keep throwing me out. And it's overseen now by somebody who is pretty much wine aristocracy, because Wayve, you've got a really, really cool title, and it's a fairly recent one that makes you quite unique in South African wine.
I think, well, as far as I know, recently I was the first female to be certified through the Court of Master Sommeliers on African soil. For the first time ever in African history, the court came down to South Africa, to Johannesburg, and ran their program, the introductory and the certified sommelier course. And it was tough, and so myself and 3 others passed the exam first time round. And it was 2 gents and myself.
Congratulations.
So, yeah,
It sounds awfully important. What does it actually mean?
Well, it means that it's your stripes as a sommelier. It's a test to show that your knowledge is proficient in service, in tasting, and in theory, according to, I think, an international standard that's not just a South African level, but is at the same level of any sommelier at any hotel or good restaurant all around the world.
So if I give you a wine cork, you can tell me the star sign of the winemaker. That's pretty much where you are.
I can try.
It's the culmination of what is still a relatively young career, but clearly one that you're enormously passionate about. Where did that love of wine kick off?
I think it started when I was working in the UK. I was born in Cape Town. I grew up in South Africa. So during that time, you're exposed to like what you see in the supermarkets in South Africa. And then I went to London, and I was just opened up to this world of anything from anywhere, of different ages, different styles, and it just kind of like blew my mind. And I think, that was the beginning of my journey. Moving back to South Africa, I worked in the winelands. I had the opportunity to get first-hand experience with the winemakers, being so close to all the farms, develop a personal relationship with many winemakers in the area. And I think the rest is kind of just a natural progression.
You've worked in some really cool places. Now, Ellerman House, which we'll get to in more detail later, is as fine a hotel as there is on the planet. But to be here, you had to give up life on a rather nice island.
Yes. So for around 18 months, I was the head sommelier at Cheval Blanc Randelli, which is in the Maldives, owned by LVMH. We had the most incredible cellar. It's something that you can only really explain, like, you will only understand if you've been there. So I mean, Grand Crus from Burgundy, from Bordeaux, going back to the 1940s, incredible wines. So I met some amazing people, I learned a lot, and I got to, I think, broaden and expand my palette in a way that being in South Africa would have never, ever happened.
And has that then allowed you to gain a greater appreciation for South African wine, having such a global perspective?
Absolutely. I mean, to be able to compare the quality of a good South African wine with its counterparts from all over the world, I mean, the name may not be as prestigious, but the quality is, I think, definitely up there, on par.
You've been able to compare not just wine, but also the restaurants that you've worked at. You've spent some time here in South Africa with what is arguably our finest restaurant in the Test Kitchen. What's the pressure like when you're working with somebody like Luke Del Roberts and his team, who are so inventive and so exciting and produce such extraordinary food, and you've now got to get the wine to match?
Yeah, I mean, I think on a level of creativity, Luke Del Roberts he's really in a league of his own. So often you are expected to kind of match the creativity level, but often he's the one who's pushing you. His ideas with regards to not just food, but beverage, and not even just wine, loads of different styles of drinks, it was very inspirational. We created some amazing things. I mean, for example, we created a 12-course tea pairing.
I remember that.
Yeah, for people who don't drink wine or drink alcohol, which was amazing. And it was warm teas, cold teas that worked perfectly with the tasting menu. So yeah, I learned to push the boundaries a lot and push myself as well.
We're starting to see more people experimenting with wine and throwing out the window, well, it's fish and chicken, so it must be a white wine, it's a steak, it must be a big Bordeaux blend. What's your most inventive pairing if you look back? What have you done? You thought, gee, this is not going to work, and it's turned out to be absolutely brilliant.
Wow. Desserts and red wine, people may not necessarily think they work, but it's the balance, I think, of sweetness in the food. Dark chocolate and red wine work incredibly well together. Pinot Noir and chocolate desserts are fantastic. And I think often people stick to what they are supposed to do or what they've been told to do. But I think as long as everything is in balance, things can work that you don't expect to work. For me, the most important thing with food and wine pairing is balance. And yeah, with regards to acidity, sweetness, alcohol, tannin, as long as everything's in balance, it should not be too bad. Yeah.
Which leads to a question that I'm always fascinated to get the answer from sommeliers. I'm very envious of the job that you get to do. You get to taste wonderful wine and explore incredible wine. But with every job, there is a downside. What is that one question that people ask you as a sommelier that you hate, or what is the one thing people do with their wine that you really wish they wouldn't?
A lot of, I want to say adding ice to wine.
We are cut from similar cloth.
Yeah, I mean, as long as if it's one block, it's okay. But technically, our job is to ensure that wines are at the correct temperature. Just like a good chef feels that they don't need to put salt and pepper on the table. You know, it's up to us to ensure that guests don't have to do any of that. But yeah, ice in wine is not, it's not my favorite.
You find yourself now at Ellerman House. It's become an iconic hotel around the world if you look at some of the rock stars and superstars who've been to stay here. So you've got a fairly demanding clientele in terms of these are people who've had the very best all over the world. You're now showcasing South African wine to them. What is your general reaction from people who are here in South Africa the first time, who are trying South African wine that you've recommended to them?
I think being at Ellerman House, we're incredibly lucky to have people who are open to exploring new things. Of course, when they're in South Africa, all they really want to drink is South African wine. So we try to have a balance of some interesting kind of new age wines, but also like classic wines for different times of the day, different meal times, lunches, dinners. We have winemakers who've been really supportive towards us, and in return we like to support them as well. So you'll find a mix of some cool kind of quirky wines, but also like the South African gems and the real iconic South African wines in our cellar.
Your cellar is spectacular. I'd happily live there for the rest of my life. In that cellar are some extraordinary wines. I know we're going to taste one of your favourites in just a moment.
Yes.
But if I were to go into the cellar and I were to pick one bottle of white and one bottle of red as my two last bottles of wine ever, what would those two bottles be?
I think my choice for white wine would be the 2017 vintage of Ibn Sadi's Mevrouw Kirsten, which is from a single small vineyard in Stellenbosch. A really interesting story behind that wine as well. For reds, it's difficult. I might say a bottle of the 1985 Chateau Libertas, because that's my birth year. And I think that's really one of, I think, the true like icons of South African wine, not necessarily the premium gems, but something that I think is a very important part of our wine industry.
I drank some of these 78 Chateau Libertas last year, being my birth year, and it was glorious.
Amazing. Wow. And it's hilarious because I look at the stock sheets and the cost price of this wine is like 8 rand.
In that case, I'll take 100 bottles, please. All right, so it's a wonderful wine. Ibn Sadi is a proper rock star in every sense. I think he'd probably prefer to be surfing if you gave him the choice, but when he's making wine, he does a pretty good job. And a lovely red as well. And then you've got a personal interest in bubbles. I know we're going to have a bottle of some of South Africa's finest in just a moment. What is it about bubbles for you?
Of course, it's the balance of flavor. It's the bubbles. They're so refreshing. I love the style. I think the fact that it does tend to work incredibly well with food. Bubbly, in terms of balance, works very well with lighter style food. When it comes to pairing it with heavier styles, the bubbles are very cleansing, very refreshing. So it's versatile, it's delicious, and I think just the whole sort of like celebratory tradition behind sparkling wine is something I love as well.
All right, well, we're going to celebrate the fact that I get to hang out with you in the cellar. So I'll let you go and grab those bubbles. And I know you've also spoken to the kitchen.
Yeah.
Peter Tempelhoff overseeing what was already a fantastic kitchen, but he's added his touch of magic to it. So some food coming and some bubbles. And in just a moment, more good reasons to spend time at Ellerman House. So I've eaten many, many times at Ellerman House. I've also had the occasional glass of wine here. We're going to get to your wine of choice in a moment, but this looks fabulous. This might be the best breakfast I'll have this year.
Well, this is something that our head chef, under the guidance of Peter Tempelhoff, has prepared for you. His name's Rudy Blau. It's a langoustine dish. It's served with edamame, apples, baby squid, and a spekboom aioli or mayonnaise.
It looks fantastic. The ingredients sound local and fresh and perfect, and they sound like something that might go quite well with, I don't know, maybe some bubbles?
Possibly. Well, let's find out. So I've selected to serve the Le Lude Brut, produced in Franschhoek. It's a Method Cap Classique made of a blend of roughly equal parts of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. It's left on the lease for 3 years, so still quite fresh, but showing some really nice sort of like aged secondary and touch of tertiary characters. So if you're ready, I'll open it up. And
Please do.
Perfect.
Please do. What better way to start the day? And of course, this is what the French would know as champagne, because they have to call it champagne because they're not allowed to call it Cap Classique. That's
Yes.
just us. And across the board, we're making better and better wine in South Africa. But bubbles in particular, over the last few years, we look at people like Charles Fox, like Paul René, like Le Lude. It's just exceptional.
I agree. I think people are focusing more and more on, first of all, getting their base wine 100%. Method Cap Classique is growing so much in popularity internationally that I guess we need to sort of step up to the stage in terms of quality.
All right, well, we're doing exactly that this morning with this Le Lude.
Smells pretty good.
Right. And what I love here, and we spoke about this on an episode of Dan Really Likes Wine last year, was the move away from the traditional aesthetically pleasing slimline Kate Moss-like flute to something that really gives you the opportunity to take in the nose and to experience and enjoy the wine so much more.
Yeah, I think, I've chosen to use this glass purely because the flute is wonderful for aesthetic reasons, but this glass will allow a little bit more air into the glass. It will allow the wine to become, to come into contact with air, to open up a little bit more. Also, the design of the top of the glass will direct the flow of wine technically onto many more different parts of your tongue that will perceive different flavors. So
this is why the Court of Sommeliers gave her that big certificate. She knows things like this.
So yeah, you should be able to pick up a lot more fruitiness in the front, acidity on the sides, touch of sort of like savory umami in the middle, and then if there is any tannin, you'll usually be able to pick it up on the sides of your mouth.
All right, let's see if my palate lives up to expectations. An excellent selection, and I'm now going to see how it goes with my breakfast here.
So langoustines, I think, are quite naturally, as the shellfish, are quite naturally sweet. They've just got this lovely sweetness when cooked. The wine that I've chosen, although it is sort of like crisp and bone dry, it does have this sort of subtle fruitiness. Fruitiness in wine, I find, gives you the impression that it's a little bit sweeter than it actually is. And I think that sort of sweet component will pair perfectly well with each other. The aioli, or the emulsion, the sauce on the plate, bubbles when it comes to pairing wine with slightly richer food, has this very sort of like lifting, cleansing effect. And once again, just creating that sort of like beautiful, perfect balance. Yeah, and I guess bubbles just help to enhance the natural sort of oceanic character of shellfish and fish anyway.
So it's not just complementing, but almost acting as a constant sorbet at the same time.
Absolutely.
Ha. We are in the presence of genius. It's just such a lovely pairing, and the food is so fair. It tastes like that langoustine was caught this morning, and it's one of the things I often hate with shellfish is when people have overdone them, and they get that kind of stickiness to them, which is not ideal. And that's just crisp and perfect, and it applies to the bubbles as well.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you like it.
I certainly do. I do have one last question for you before you set off to spend your day drinking wine, as one must when one is an acclaimed sommelier.
Tasting.
5 years' time, where does Wayve find herself? What would you like to be doing?
I think, Ellerman House is somewhere that I would like to be, hopefully still in 5 years' time. The team who runs Ellerman, the owner of Ellerman House, he invests a lot in his staff, in his team. But I would, I think, like to be traveling a lot more, exploring the different regions, visiting some countries, and hopefully, I think, taking the wine gallery and our wine collection really to the next level. So that's my plan for the next 5 years, but you'll have to ask me again in 5 years.
All right, well, I'm sure we'll see plenty of each other before then, because I do love coming back to Ellerman House, and all the more reason to do so when there is fabulous food and wine to be had, and with an expert overseeing all of it. So that is this week's episode of the Sommeliers with Nederburg. I'm Dan Really Likes Wine, the chance to meet some of the people behind a great South African industry, people who are wonderful ambassadors for South African wine, and, as we've discovered today, people who are incredibly passionate about what they do. See you next week.